Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the OnReviewCast. I'm your host here, Ash, and today on review, we're back again with another episode of Interview with a Vampire. Guys, are you excited? This is episode 5 of Interview with a Vampire on review. So let's get into it. Let's do it. Yeah. And just like every episode, guys, we're going to get our episode breakdown courtesy of fandom. And this episode is called Don't Be Afraid, Just Start the Tape. So Don't Be Afraid, Just Start the Tape is the 5th episode in the 2nd season of the Interview with a Vampire and the 12th episode of the series overall. It aired June 9th, 2024 on AMC and AMC+. Synopsis. With Louis' help, Malloy delves into a haunted memory of his own. Also, this episode, was written by Jonathan Krenzarski and Hannah Maskovich. I always noticed that some of these episodes that particular writers are on, like Hannah does a good job with these episodes, and this episode was actually, I think it was a well job done because it answered a lot of questions that we had about what exactly happened in San Francisco. First of all, guys, before we actually also jump in, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors. Our sponsor today is Anomaly Beats by Ash. Look me up on YouTube, guys. If you like anime style music, if you like any kind of anime-ish, kind of like lo-fi, kind of hip-hop kind of beat, go ahead and check us out on Anomaly Beats. You will not be disappointed. You'll love it. You'll love the sounds of it. And hopefully, you'll enjoy it. But on with the show. Like I said, this episode of actually devolves and it gives us a lot of delves into a lot of things that was kind of said about the past when it comes to San Francisco. And funnily enough, this San Francisco thing was actually a part of the movie. I don't know if you guys have seen Interview with a Vampire, the movie. This is the 1990s version. There's some things that like are very verbatim taken right from the movie, which also came from the book. Anne Rice's universe, still part of that whole universe, and was I feel like implanted right into this. And honestly, like this episode, like I said, like it was good. But the entire interview, from what I remember, watching the movie, they didn't really show too much detail as to, because it was an interview and it was more of a recollection of past as to what happened with the vampire Louis, right? But they didn't happen to tell or just devolve or go into how much detail as to what exactly happened in the actual interview process itself. But this episode gets into it, and this is what I find actually being very fascinating, because this entire time we've been very focused on like the past with Louis and Amon, and what has happened in their past and how they got to meet each other, what the situation was with Lestat, him being in love with Lestat, and all this other crazy stuff that was happening and going on. We forget that, they showed it previously slightly in season 1, that, in the real world, present day actual story timeline, Malloy and Louis had actually met before. And they met at a bar and actually played this out, and they showed this within the actual season 1. It's a short little tiny clip, I think, at the end of one of those episodes, and we get to see them talking at a bar, and then they cut and it basically ends. But in this episode, we delve into some real deep details as to what happened during that interview, and the details that support as to what happens in the interview. And I gotta say, man, like this episode, they stay true to their actual story beats, and they definitely are paying attention when it comes to the script, because certain things like how Armand had to save Louis, and how how I wanted to be saved, Louis, and how I had been hinting out throughout this entire season that like we've had that sneaking suspicion that Louis' memories is being tampered with some degree, and to some kind of portion. And I was saying this, I was toting it, and we get some more confirmation and revelations on that within this episode. I absolutely fucking love it. It's great. So, but more on that later. Let's get to some breaking down this episode a little bit. So this episode kind of starts off with Armand going off on a hunt. He's going for lunch, And as he gets older, he says, Louis explains to Malloy that he rather prefers to hunt his lunch, and they make a sport out of it, and they make if he can get from point A to point B in a certain amount of time, the guy would win the money or he dies, essentially. So Armand's fucking off basically for the grand portion of this interview. But he's in the flashbacks, and it's a recollection from Louis' perspective once again, as it should be, in my opinion. It's a recollection of Louis' flashback from his perspective, because like I mentioned before, like when they do the whole back and forth thing, it's weird. They haven't really done it much since they first introduced Armand into it, but I don't know, I feel like we're getting back to a lot of roots when it comes to this episode. Do you know what I mean, guys? Like it's more like we're getting more back to the original formula, if you will, if I can say, to Armand and Louis having this interview, because that's how it basically was in season 1. Armand and Louis one-on-one having this interview, talking about the past and etc. What it is. However, it's a little bit different now because Malloy, not Armand and Louis, Malloy and Louis one-on-one. Malloy is now a part of the story. The interviewer has now become a part of the story, and it's a different dynamic as to what he remembers, Malloy, and also what Louis remembers as well going through this. And I think it's a fascinating thing. This is probably like one of the best episodes, in my opinion, this season. Like, they did a really good job doing this one. This one was definitely a home run, folks, in my opinion. So, like I was saying before, Armand goes to fuck off and he goes on his hunt. And it seems like at first, actually, I guess if you maybe didn't see the preview for the previous episode, this might come as a little bit of a shock, but it seems like, Louis is going to basically pick off right where they left off and expand upon the story a little bit more. But Malloy he even expresses it himself inside of the episode. He says that it's more of a, well, he says more of a surprise. He's like, well, it might feel like an ambush, but he's like, I want to talk about, here's a recording that I found from San Francisco X, Y, and Z. And then he gets into like basically saying Louis like, hey man, let's just cut the shit. Your boyfriend isn't here. Let's just like own up to what happened. We met a couple years ago, one-on-one. We started to do this interview. Something happened. I don't remember. I want to know what happened. And he just basically confronts him about it. And again, ballsy considering, this guy's a fucking vampire. But Daniel Malloy gives no fucks, I feel like. Not really. He's stood up to Louis before. So, but again, like a very, very, in his very nature of being the brazen journalist and discovering things, he just seems, like straight up, like, what the fuck happened. So they start to reminisce about this, like, the life that he had in the 70s, and he brought him to and he explained, well, Louis starts to explain what he remembers from, as far as he knows, from how their first interview basically went. And they start to, and I think at one point they eventually start to marry the two, and it's kind of like they're both narrating, but not in that like annoying way, like how Armand and Louis was like, kind of like nattering, not like in that way. It was more that they were taking appropriate turns, not like they were this power couple, like how they were in the last fucking episode. That was so fucking annoying. Oh my God. Fucking horrible, honestly. But yeah, that's basically essentially what happened. And of course, like in the initial response to this, initially Malloy thinks that he's basically there for interview / potentially sex. I mean, like, honestly, and he was even asking Louis, like, did they sleep together? Was it a thing where you were trying to invite me to just basically bang? And then so I found it so funny, like Malloy offered, and Louis was kind of like, yeah, no, this isn't what that is. I'm just trying to, like, get a proper interview out of you and make you get some kind of good content, basically. Try to basically get some good content here. So, but this kind of answers a little bit of the questions that I was kind of saying, like what basically sparked this interview in the first place. This episode, we got to delve into that in the first place, and we actually see just what it basically came down to was that Malloy and Louis essentially had this connection, and so much so that he felt that he needed to connect with him in a way and to basically pour his life story out to him and have it somewhat documented to a certain degree, essentially. So they started to do this interview after he tells him like, hey, no, that's not what this is. I'm not trying to like bang, basically. And they started to do this interview, and he gets to the point where he starts to tell him, Louis starts to tell Malloy about, you know, Lestat and Claudia, and he's giving them the whole basic rundown. And I feel like it was odd in a few matter of cuts and a few matter of words that he was basically explaining, like, you know, the main characters in the main story, essentially. He was basically given a rundown. I felt like the entire season 1 and half of season 2 was, I guess because we've been watching it, was basically caught up within a few sentences as to how basically everything went down. And they clearly condensed that in a really well way. They wrote that in a very awesome kind of way. So they said that, you know, well, Louis basically explained that Lestat, Claudia, and Reid was basically in the story. So the younger Louis of that time, the 1970s Louis, 1970s Malloy, the younger Malloy is all caught up now on basically what had happened so far. And Louis, like I said, Louis was basically pouring his heart out to this until, you know, eventually Louis detonates. Is how Malloy puts it, and he basically attacks Malloy, and he attacks him when he starts asking him about giving him the dark gift, essentially turning him into a vampire. Now, this is where this actually gets kind of interesting, because like this particular section or this particular scenes, these several scenes, was actually a part of the movie. At the end, and this is at the end of the movie, because this is again getting more and more interesting, because we're delving into some content that are some things that hasn't been necessarily filmed or put into kind of video format. So when he starts to ask him about the dark gift, and he basically tells him that, well, he basically upsets Louis. He says something along the lines of like, "You've forgotten the whole purpose of your own story, man. Like your humanity isn't necessarily like to just give up." Because I think he was talking about how he wanted to give up, and the scene when Claudia was essentially deciding to leave on the train and leave them, and how he wanted to go and chase after Claudia, and how he sat on the bench and he felt like that was the wrong decision. And to that response, you know, you can tell that this young version of Daniel Malloy was very brazen and very young and very green. He's kind of like, then what? That whole thing was just like, yeah, obviously. I like they painted I'm trying to just get at is like, they painted the young Daniel Malloy very well, very, like I said, like just very out of his depth, kind of like very different from the older, more mature Daniel Malloy that we know today. I think they did a really very good job with that. But anyway, when I started to bring up the whole idea of he tried to bring up the whole idea of like turning him into a vampire, and the whole explanation of how that idea is basically so fucking stupid, by all accounts, by Louis' accounts. He basically gets upset with him. And like I said, this happens in the movie too, but this is a very short thing. And this happens at the very end of the movie, where Louis basically gets mad at Christian Bale's character, and he throws him to the ground, and Christian Bale actually runs out of the apartment where they are, and he hops inside the car, and he basically drives off. And that's essentially, ironically, he meets Lestat at that point. But in the actual TV series, we have what happens was that Louis actually attacks Malloy, and while giving him the dark gift, and because it angers him, it sets him that he does not, he's not basically understanding the torturous nature of the vampire, the things that he's gone through. he doesn't quite understand and get that this is a cautionary tale. This isn't necessarily a, oh, you know, I want you to be fascinated and enthralled with this experience and etc. No, this is a cautionary tale as to what his suffering and his pain and what he actually is and what he's basically about. So he starts to attack him, and that's when Armand comes in. In the movie, we didn't necessarily get that. In this series, we are getting that. So Armand comes in and he saves Louis and he pushes him to the side. He pushes him to the side of lunging on basically Malloy's neck. And the amount of strength that he done that with, amazing, by the way, because when he threw him, he just like flung him across the room, and Malloy just like left a hole inside of the wall. The fucking like sheetrock, I think, broke in the wall. Is actually fucking insane. But yeah, like, and then Louis and Lestat essentially get into this huge argument, and how because Louis is now fucking high off his mind because he pumped the Malloy full of drugs, and now he's drunk his blood, and so those drugs have basically gotten into his system now. And you know, when you get a little high, and you get a little drunk, or you get a little loose with the inhibitions, things start to come out, and we see the nooks and the crannies and the cracks that is the experience, that is the connection between Malloy, the connection between Louis and Armand. And it's pretty it's pretty sad, because it almost kind of seems like it's like the same thing. I'm like, all couples fight, yeah, sure, but it's almost kind of like the same situation, though the jealousy kind of somewhat to the degree situation with Lestat and Louis basically have. So they have issue or a thing that they must get past when it comes to infidelity and actually trusting one another and trusting each other as well. I think that's something to say about Louis' character. He can't, for some reason, he just can't find that one particular person to stay with and stay commitment. I think he has commitment issues. He has commitment issues, and he has infidelity issues for sure, I think, in general. And I mean, to a certain degree, who can really blame him, I guess, because of what he went through with Lestat. But I mean, like, you got to get past that in order to be with, or to even start being with a particular individual in the first place, in my opinion. So, I mean, but this basically shows that the unhinged and the unhealthy nature between him and Armand. But yeah, so something of note that also we should probably touch on throughout this as well is that he going through this, like I said, like, it's kind of a story of that Malloy. It becomes less of an interview and more of like a trip down memory lane, was to like, you know, what the fuck happened last night, man? Like, between Malloy and Louis, and they're both trying to remember essentially the details of what happened and what went on during these recordings that Daniel has now revealed to Louis, and explaining to him that these are some recordings that he was able to muster up, you know, and muster up and clean up after his audio session, quote unquote audio session, which I think are those FBI agent kind of guys, cleaned up his audio file. But yeah, and as we're doing this, Louis starts to remember a few things and a few details as to like basically what happened. And one of those things was that he tried to burn himself and he tried to kill himself by going into the sun. But Armand pulls him back at the last couple of seconds and stops him from essentially dying. And he looks like he's burnt beyond recognition. Honestly, it looks really, really bad. And I wonder now at this point, though, in the actual present day, I wonder if like Louis is old enough now, because if you see it with Armand, the sun doesn't necessarily bother Armand, and he's not necessarily it's not such a big deal for him anymore. I wonder if Louis gone to that point now, because we've seen it twice now where Louis has thought about killing himself with the sun back in season 1, in the later part of season 1. In the beginning of season 1, we see him go into the sun for some reason, but that was when he was naive and he wanted to go back home because he couldn't believe that he was a vampire, and he basically burned up in Amon. Lestat basically had to look after him. That, I don't know. I was just wondering. I feel like I'm just like because I'm thinking to myself, it's like, you know, what would really help you if you had that invulnerability thing that Armand basically has after you get a certain age of being a vampire. The sun doesn't bother you anymore. That would probably help you out a lot. But I feel like it would. Because him in the sun, for some reason, his death of choice is just going into the sun. I guess for some reason. Anyway, so we get to the point where he's all burnt up now, and Amon is in the room, and Amon basically is upset as to what has happened and what has transpired so far with this. They called him the boy. This boy, I guess, technically appropriately named because they're fucking older vampires, or they're ancients, and they weren't ancient, but like they're really old compared to Malloy. I mean, I guess sort of, fair enough. So the interview kind of takes a reversal kind of thing, because what happens is Armand starts to question young Malloy as to, like, what makes you so fucking special? What makes you so great? That Louis has taken an interest in you. Like, why are you worth looking into, and why are you so great? And this entire time, he's just basically manipulating his body and manipulating his mind, and basically showing off his Jean from X-Men abilities, manipulating his body and contorting his body in all kind of ways. And it's a little cheese, but it also I think I've somewhat kind of used to it now, because it's kind of just shows me basically that Armand is the older vampire, I guess, older, slightly more mature vampire. Something I want to talk about real quick is the telepathic abilities that came along with in this episode. So previously we talked about this too. We know that, like, vampires, right? Vampires can communicate with other vampires telepathically. We've seen this in season 1, and we've seen it also in season 2. But the thing that was like odd to me about this interaction, when Louis was burnt up and he was in the coffin, and he was trying to get a connection. Our mom was trying to get a connection with Lestat, and he made like basically a telepathic phone call with Lestat, trying to communicate with him and talking to him, trying to be a proxy essentially for their communication between him and Louis. And this proved several things. Actually, this is why this is such an amazing scene. This was several things. This proved that, one, Lestat's fucking alive, like how I was saying before. He's alive, but we don't know, like I was saying previously in the other video, if that entire time that was Lestat actually communicating with Louis. That's still up in the air for debate. But we know that, of course, like, Lestat is still fucking alive. He's still there. He's still alive. He's still... Because, like, that happened, this is in the 70s. That happened in the, like, 1800s or whatever it is. That whole thing with him and Lestat. So Louis just, like, laying there in bed, laying there in the coffin, and he doesn't say a thing to Armand, who was trying to act as a stand-in, as a proxy for Lestat, and communicating with him and all his thoughts and ideas. And so far, the communication's going, like... pretty normal, as you expect, until Lestat is like, "Oh, tell him that I love him," and Armand fucking chokes up, and he just is. You can tell that Armand can't do it, because Armand is like basically madly in love with this man, and he can't tell him that, like, hey, like, you know. This is he can't bear to let his lover know that there's another lover out there. It's like, drama. But I thought that it was like, I thought this was interesting because another reason I thought it was interesting because, like, we how far away is Lestat? Think about it. How far away is Lestat? And where are they right now? Okay, they're in San Francisco. Lestat would have to also be in San Francisco as well. We know from the movie, also based on the books, that we see Lestat also is in San Francisco at the end of the movie, because that's when he meets Malloy. But is he really in San Francisco at the end of this, where they are right now in the series? Is he really in San Francisco? Because I bring this up because if he is not, then that actually shows the versatility and the strength of Armand's telepathic ability. I don't think there is I would think that there is a range cap on how far you can telepathically communicate with a vampire when it comes to vampires, communicating with other vampires. Now I assume that strength would depend on the range of how far you can go. Because if he was in a whole different state, a whole different country, that's actually fucking impressive. It actually shows how powerful Armand is. None that I've ever doubted like Armand being powerful in the first place, having fucking fire and telepathic abilities. Like that's a given. That's fucking amazing in itself. That's cool. But I feel like that's a whole nother like god level of like telepathic communication when it comes to being a vampire. If he was in a whole different state or country, and this might be the case, because I thought we also see within this episode that like while there's a scene where Daniel Malloy is like actually like watching TV and he's being held captive now essentially by Armand and to some degree Louis as well. And while he's having them captive, Daniel Malloy is noticing that he can move his body again. It's like what's going on. What's going on is that Armand now is focusing all of his energy and putting all of his energy into having this conversation, this telepathic conversation. It seems like to have the connection with someone who he was talking to, and they leave a little bit of mystery of that within the series as well. He was talking to someone about how he's there with him now, X, Y, and Z, et cetera, and I'm like, who are you talking to? Because at this point I'm thinking that they hinted at it towards a little bit in some previous episodes that the fire has now happened, and the fire that happened must have killed all of your, and this is assumptions I guess I'm making from this point on. The fire that happened before is the thing that wiped out half, if not all, of your coven. And so most of the majority of people who which is probably just Louis at this point, isn't that far away or isn't really that much. But it seems like he was talking to multiple people, and I guess to hold that connection maybe with multiple people, he would then need more vampire magic going on, more vampire magic bullshit going on, and which would release his grip a little bit on Malloy, enabling him to try to basically run and get away, which he doesn't, by the way. He's like resting, like fucking knocks Malloy out. He's not able to get in. He's not able to escape that. But my point being, I guess, is that this episode also shows the degree as to which how powerful Armand is, and I think also they hinted at it a little bit as well. There's an upper echelon of like other vampiric society maybe that's also in control, that's probably potentially watching Louis as well. For reasons, I don't know. For reasons, who can say? Who can say why it's happening or not? But yeah. So Daniel Malloy tries to get away, but he stops him, and then the decision is basically made by Armand to basically kill Malloy, and it was going to happen. It was going to go down, and until Louis stumbles out of the room that he was staying in, he tells Armand to wait, no, I want him to live. I want him to live as a symbol of basically what our love has endured and what has gone through. Which, if I'm being honest, folks, like I kind of understand and I kind of get. However, I mean, it doesn't seem, story-wise, it doesn't seem likely that would have happened. More likely would have happened like they would have killed Malloy. But I mean, how else would we explain it? We see Malloy as an old man now. We can't really explain that. But I feel like from a realistic perspective, if this was to actually happen, more than likely not, they would have probably killed Malloy. But they drafted. I think they told us in the explanation for keeping him alive is it's believable, but it's less believable. I feel like, I guess, for vampire sakes, like why you expect vampires to just be like either to eventually kill him or to not have left him alive and killed him. And so what happens is Louis ends up erasing Armand's mind, right? He's taking away certain sections of his mind and his memories to basically keep the vampiric society and vampiric nature and vampiric existence to a certain degree, and certain parts of his interview a secret. And that's what we find out. But there's something that we're forgetting within this episode is that Louis also is missing some time in that time frame. He's missing some memories as well. Someone must have also manipulated his memories as well. And the number one suspect that we suspect is basically Armand. And that's when the episode comes to more or less an end, when Armand comes in and he's wearing the shades that the young man had at the beginning, who he was gonna go and hunt, basically kill. And that's basically the end of the episode. Honestly, guys, like, in my opinion, strong episode, really strong episode, really, really good episode. Like, in my opinion, we got to cover a lot of good stuff. Like I said, when we have the writer, for some reason, I noticed that we always have good, basically a good episode on our hands coming in. But now I guess where it comes to the end of the show, we're going to talk about Ash's favorite scenes. Yeah, Ash's favorite scenes. Coming in at number 3, Louis' detonation on Malloy. I thought that was actually pretty cool. That was a good scene because they actually paid homage to the actual movie as well as like the books. There were some lines from the movie. There's some lines from the movies and the books. I think that was taken directly from the book. That was just like canon, and I appreciate anything that's canon towards any kind of like work or any kind of like even somewhat derivative things that's being created by the creators. I think that's amazing. But yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. Like, I thought that was really cool. Coming in at number 2, Armand communication telepathically with other vampires, along with Lestat. That was actually really, really cool because it shows more or less, like, again, like, we know like Armand is a very powerful vampire, but like the degree at which how powerful he is. Because if he's like Cerebro, so like Jean from X-Men, where he can communicate with anyone on the planet, that's fucking awesome. Actually, that's a pretty cool concept. That's really really cool, and actually shows how powerful, and I guess in certain cases how old he is as well. And then coming in at number 1, the reset and the rewriting of Daniel Malloy's mind. I don't think that we actually even really saw that they had this ability to rewrite minds, essentially, and to reprogram minds. I didn't know that the vampires in this universe had this ability, so that's actually something kind of new that I'm actually okay with. I'm okay with the abilities. The other abilities like telepathic, pyrotechnics, and all this power telepathy in general, all this other things, all these other witch stuff that they're doing, that's kind of weird to me. But for some reason, the mind control thing, I think because it follows the original Bram story, I maybe to some degree to having those abilities like shape shifting, like fangs and stuff, and like moving fast and vampire strength. I'm cool with all those things, but like, yeah, like weird stuff like flying. Anyway, but I thought this was a really cool addition. I've never really seen it to a certain degree before. Well, we haven't seen it in this series to a certain degree before, but we've seen like compulsion in the Vampire Diaries and etc. So I thought that was really kind of cool. But yeah, that was Ash's favorite scenes. And now, last segment of the show, we're gonna jump into the On Review score. And giving On Review score, On Review gives Interview with the Vampire Season 2, Episode 5. I'm gonna give it a strong 3 out of 5, guys. Strong 3 out of 5. Actually, you know what? No, we're gonna give it a 4. It's gonna be a 4. It's going to be a 4 out of 5. This episode is actually really, really good. It delves into I think the lore of, what is Interview with the Vampire. But anyway, guys, I'm out of time. Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Don't forget to, interact with us on all of our socials, the Facebook, the Instagram, the Twitter. Thank you so much for listening / watching, like I said before. And lastly, guys, be safe, be kind, be you. Take care.